Welcome to the HCI family of podcasts. We're your source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We share our own original research, explore industry trends, and interview executives and thought leaders from across the globe. Join us for practitioner-oriented content around all things leadership, HR, talent management, organizational development, and change management. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with the HCI family of podcasts. Bob Borcherdt, welcome to the conversation today.
Yeah, thanks, John. Glad to be here and really looking forward to it.
It is a pleasure to be with you. You're joining us from Tennessee. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. And today we're going to be talking about accessing the unused human capacity in your organization. This is a topic I love. Just the way you framed this up in preparation for our conversation today. I love thinking about human capacity. I love finding ways to access that, both as a leader to kind of unlock that in our people, but really to help them learn how to access it within themselves, right? I'm a believer that you can't really motivate people. I mean, you can use carrots and sticks to try to get people to do what you want, but really motivation comes from within. And so you try to create the environment in which people can be their best selves and like you say in the framing for today, that they can really access their human capacity. So that's what we're going to explore together today. As we get started, I wanted to share Bob's bio with everybody. Bob Borcherdt is a visionary through and through. He has been a leader, strategist, and business owner for over 35 years. His deep passion for people and leadership is what led him in 2011 to start Integrate, spelled in to great, which I love also, a leadership consulting company. Bob founded Integrate with the intent to help people and businesses grow by building better leaders. What else would you like to share by way of your background, personal context before we dive on in further?
Yeah, I think probably the most important thing is, and I've listened to some of your previous podcasts, and I don't come from academia. And so I'm a boots on the ground business owner, highly observant type of person who loves to read and then implement the things that he has read. So I'm kind of a trial and error, practice on the ground type of guy. So a lot of the things that we'll talk about today come from those experiences, those observations, things we've seen in our clients. And that's kind of the perspective that we take.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. And I like to highlight the importance of, you have like academic expertise and you have people who get degrees and they do research and whatever. And there's value in that. Absolutely. And
yes,
I'm one of those. Like, I hope there's value in that. But there's also living expertise. And I think we do ourselves a disservice if we devalue either of those. Like they should go hand in hand, right? The living expertise of people, boots on the ground, people who are really doing the work in day out. We need those perspectives and we need to understand those. You can take the best academic theory in the world, it may or may not actually work very well in practice in the real world.
Yeah.
And so absolutely, thank you for bringing that perspective. And
where we benefit is we need your research. We need to glean from those insights and go try those things and experiment with them and see them. So you're right, it is a two-way street.
Yeah, and I like that word, experiment. It's all about experimentation, right? It could be like a controlled experiment within, like a research setting, but most of the time this is like lived experience and lived experimenting, right? Design thinking, iterating. You try things, you figure out what works, what doesn't work, you try again. And I'm all for that, all for rapid experimentation and iteration to try things and figure out what actually works for you. Because one thing's for sure, I can do a study on whatever and have findings. The generalizability of those findings don't always fit in every context. Like context matters. Context is king, right? And so I could have two organizations that on paper look pretty darn similar, same industry, same general product or service that they provide, same general size, same kind of stage of growth, it could check the box of a lot of very similar characteristics, but I guarantee you that there will still be very unique elements within each of those businesses. And so if I, as an academic or as a consultant, go in and just kind of assume these are basically the same thing, I'm going to do what I did successfully here, in this organization, now I'm going to do it over here. that's a recipe for failure. Like it never
That's right.
works. You have to always take it anew, afresh, and understand that context matters more. So it just matters so much in making sure that we're successful. So, anyways, a great
Yes.
kind of level set and pre-discussion. I think that's really, really valuable. All right, let's go ahead and dive on in to talk about this human capacity piece.
Yeah.
First, what do you mean by that? I mean, it's probably
Yes.
obvious to people, but I think everyone has a slightly different kind of way of making sense of that idea. What does human capacity mean to you? And then we can start to dig into how you can access that.
Yes. So, keep in mind, I'm a business owner and I come from that perspective. So what we typically do when we're in conversation with a potential client, let's say, we're going to ask them this question. We're going to say, do you have any line item on any of your financial statements to measure the unused human capacity in your organization?
Mm,
And the answer is no. No
yeah.
one's ever said yes, right? They measure a lot of other things like turnover cost and other things that are valuable. And then we'll follow that up with a question and say, do you have it in your organization? And John, interestingly enough, they always say yes. Like
Mm,
somehow intuitively, we as leaders know there's still untapped capacity in me, and there's untapped capacity in the people around us. The problem is we're not like machines in a manufacturing facility. If you have a machine in a manufacturing facility that's at 50% capacity and we can get it to 85% capacity, we know exactly what that's going to do to our bottom line. The same
right.
thing is true with unused human capacity. If we can tap into that, don't you think that returns a greater profit to the business? Because there has to be an ROI on development initiatives, right? So we
Yeah.
have to be able to make more money. But that's not the only reason why we do it as business owners, because ultimately we want fulfilled employees. And if we can put them in a position to win and tap into the fullest version of themselves, and they're more engaged and happier in the workplace, and it flows to the bottom line, that seems to be the perfect space for us. And that's what we try and tap into. And oftentimes we'll get asked the question, well, how do you do that? And I'm sure that's kind of what we'll dive into a little bit today as we have our discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. And you highlighted the importance, that ROI piece. So the bottom line
Yes,
business case of what you're trying to do, always important. If you can't articulate that, then you're not going to get buy-in from C-suite executives and other key stakeholders, right? So you need to
exactly.
absolutely hit those points. But there's the human case too, and it's not either or. That's the thing is
No, it's
sometimes
not.
I hear people make this like argument as though it's a fixed pie and you can either only focus on bottom line or you can focus on people and never the twain will meet. It's ridiculous. Like there's
It
so
is.
much research on that and experience, that people have that tell us that they are complementary, right? So when you focus on your
Absolutely.
people, you focus on the human case that drives meaning, passion, purpose in the work that people do. That will improve a wide range of bottom line outcomes for the organization. It's just sometimes there's a bit of a lag effect. So
That's right.
that's the challenge, because we're in a world that values the quarterly earnings reports and immediacy. And if you're investing in your people, it may take a quarter or two to start to see those impacts on the bottom line, but they will be there. You just have to
That's
have
right.
some commitment towards it. So, anyways, being able to
Exactly.
speak to both is really, really important. Okay,
And we see
let's
it as a both and. Yep.
yeah, absolutely. A both and. Great way to put it. Okay, so you've run businesses as an entrepreneur. Before we start to talk about how we can better access that unused human capacity, broadly speaking, what are some of the biggest challenges that you've faced as a leader in the startup space and then growing and scaling your businesses?
Yeah. I think a lot of people talk about, getting the right people and getting them in the right seats. Jim Collins kind of
Yeah.
coined that in Good to Great in 2001. Great principle. And I think what we've tried to do is get deeper underneath that to go, now, how do you really effectively do that? Because I think a lot of times our lack of performance as a person in an organization is because we're the right person. We're just in the wrong role. We're in the
Right.
wrong seat, or we have some wrong job function. And we use some data and analytics to help our clients do that. But that was one of the key things I think that we see is we're losing capacity in people because we're putting them in the wrong spots. Gallup recently, within the last year, released some research, that says if you're causing people to adapt more than 20 hours a week in their job, you have them on the path of burnout. Okay, so think about that. We get somebody in a role, they're adapting in that role more than 20 hours a week, and they're on the path to burnout. Well, if you're on the path to burnout, you're not going to be at your best. I mean, that's just obvious, right? I think the other thing that we see, and it's the reason we chose the word clarity, there's a lot of confusion in most organizations. And even when I was just with a group of CEOs last week down in Charleston, and we talked about being clear. Are we really clear with our people? And you just give them a little pause, and they kind of look back at you and go, you know what? I think we are, but we're really not. We're operating with a lot of assumptions. We just have these expectations of people that we don't really communicate to them very effectively. And we believe the greatest source of frustration is an unmet expectation. Well, if those expectations aren't clear, and we're trying to run businesses, and our people are trying to do their roles in our businesses, and there's a lack of clarity or confusion or noise in the system, think about how that erodes our performance and impacts that capacity. And then I think the third one for us is just this issue of employee disengagement. I don't have to tell you, I'm sure you track the same numbers that Gallup has been tracking for over 2 decades. It's just not changing. There's no noticeable improvement in that number. And I think what we've discovered is we're starting to ask the question, why is that? Because it's not like there haven't been attempts to increase employee disengagement. And Gallup will tell you it's somewhere between $1 trillion and $1.9 trillion in lost productivity. So you want to talk about unused human capacity and quantifying it? We can quantify it just with employee disengagement. Now, here's our theory. Our theory is we think the reason that we haven't been able to fix that issue is because we don't think leaders have really ever effectively been taught how to engage with somebody, right? So imagine in our book, Leading to the One, Creating Cultures of Clarity where people are engaged, developed, and fulfilled, we have this picture of a river. And on one side of the river are 2 signs. One says understand, well, there's 3, hire, understand, and interact, okay? On the other side of the river are 3 signs, engaged, developed, and fulfilled. Our premise is this, John. We think most leaders have learned how to maybe understand and interact with their people, but they haven't learned how to truly engage the people closest to them. That's a very different thing, okay? And when you ask leaders this, it's incredible the response we get because they're really honest. They're like, now that you put it in those terms, yeah, I can understand and interact with people, but I don't think I really understand how to engage with them. So one of the bold statements we make is, what if we were to stop measuring employee engagement? And what if we actually started working on the root cause, which is training leaders how to really effectively engage with their people? Because we believe when that happens, that's where development takes place, is in that space.
Yeah, so many great things that you shared there. To wind it back just a little bit, one of the first things you were saying that I think I completely agree with, and it's a huge problem, it's part of the disengagement piece, honestly, is that communication breakdown. So I do believe that most leaders have good intentions, and I do believe most leaders probably think that they're communicating well. they probably feel like it's clear in their heads, and they're in meetings all the time where they're discussing these things. So amongst themselves, they all get it. They all understand, and they think it's pretty clear. And they sent out, a policy update or an email, or they had an all hands meeting, and they discussed it. And so now they think their job is done. And I think people just forget, because they're in the weeds day in and day out, that they forget that the average person who's, let's say a frontline worker who's just doing the work at the company, right? They're interacting with customers, they're building things, they're whatever they're doing, that all hands meeting, that's like 1 hour out of like their month, like in one ear out the other. Like it might impact them some, but they'll forget it, or they'll move on, or their attention goes elsewhere. Like you just got to hit things over and over and over again. And that's and so you have to be really disciplined about that. And that's something that most leaders just don't do. Regardless of whatever their good intentions might be. And I do believe they have generally good intentions. And so once you do that, it's no wonder that you have disconnect between expectations of leadership in the organization and then the actual lived experience of the workers, especially frontline workers who are doing the work of the organization, who are just trying to figure out how to be effective and productive and meet the needs and resolve issues and challenges and problems in real time. There's no wonder that there's a disconnect there. And
That's right.
so one of the very first things I think any good leader will do is try to identify what are the mechanisms that we can put in place to make sure that there's consistent, transparent communication, and where there's communication channels both directions so that we can be on the same page with each other. That sounds probably pretty simple, but I think that's one of the hardest things for
Yes,
leaders to do and for organizations to do well. And if you can tackle that one problem, you're probably going to address, or at least start to address the vast majority of challenges that you're facing in your organization, including the engagement and disengagement challenge.
that's right. Well, we often say just because something's common sense doesn't make it common practice, right?
Right.
And so you're right. We're not talking about rocket science here. A lot of this is common sense stuff. And, we even find you mentioned communication, there's four primary styles of communication that we as human beings speak in. And when we're communicating in our predominant default language, that's great. But if we're in a room full of people and we're only ever in that language and we don't know how to speak the other three, we may only be speaking to a fourth of the room. So even though I'm saying it, doesn't necessarily mean that three-fourths of that room is really hearing it in a context that they can understand. And so it does create a lot of confusion. And I think our organizations are filled with a lot more confusion. I wish we had a line item for confusion to see how much it
Yeah.
was costing us, right, in our financials.
Just a little example. This is a personal example just from yesterday for myself. And it speaks to the communication style issue that you were just talking about, but also
Mm-hmm.
like human beings are complex and the way we make sense of information is complex.
Yes.
And so yesterday, something was communicated to me that I felt was directly contradictory to what I had heard previously. And so I was pushing back on it a little bit, and I was having this back and forth dialogue. And the two people that I was communicating with, in their minds, it was crystal clear, and I was just confused and
Yeah.
mistaken or misinformed. I'm like, well, no, like I was explicitly told this not that long ago. And there's like, so this disconnect, right? They're like, no, you're just basically dumb. You didn't like get it. You misunderstood. um that's kind of their perspective. They didn't say those words, they were more diplomatic than
Yeah.
that, but clearly that's kind of what they were thinking. And from my standpoint, I'm thinking my initial reaction is, you're gaslighting me. Like, no, that's not what you told me. We did something totally different. Now, are they actually intentionally trying to be dishonest with me and gaslight me? Probably not. Am I
Yeah.
stupid? I don't think so. So where's the breakdown? What's the problem? And
Yeah.
I was thinking about it after work last night. I was just like, what happened here? Like, what was the breakdown? And from their perspective, they had been consistent. From my perspective, things had changed like a 180. And I realized that I think we were both right and we were both wrong. And
Mm-hmm.
part of it was my expectation that was built upon like some very early communications that subtly had shifted for them over time, but not for me. And so
Mm-hmm.
when they ended up moving in a different direction, in their minds, that was completely consistent with some of those previous subtle moves, where my mind was still stuck on some of what I thought were kind of the hard and fast things that were discussed initially. Right. So in
Yes.
their minds, they're thinking, no, this is clearly what we'd said we were doing. And in my mind, it's a huge divergence from what we were doing. Were we both wrong? Yeah, probably. Were we both right?
Mm-hmm.
To some extent, but basically it broke down the conversation until someone has to like say, okay, let's just make sure now we're on the same page. Now we can understand each other so that we can move forward in a productive manner and not get caught up in who's right, who's wrong, hurt feelings, pointing
Yeah.
fingers, whatever, right? And it was a small little thing. It wasn't a huge deal. It was a relatively small thing, but it was something that irked them. It irked me, and it had the potential of derailing something. And it was completely unnecessary. So
Yeah.
that's my point, is like the style difference that was probably partially at play in that situation, but also just like my assumptions built upon very early conversations and then not being privy to some of the subtle changes that they were making, caused this divergence. in our
Yes.
understanding. And those types of little things happen all the time
All the time. All
within
the time.
organizations, and it becomes frustrating. It becomes
Yes.
demoralizing. And so I don't have like a magic wand to like wave those things away. They're probably always going to happen, but the more intentional you try to be and the more consistent you try to be in your communications, you'll probably mitigate that and you'll reduce the frequency of those types of things happening. And then when they do happen, people can in good faith resolve them and move forward
That's
from them
right.
without getting upset or starting, moving into like calling people names or like anything like that. And I will say,
Yeah.
yesterday, there was no name calling. There was nothing like that. It was probably fairly clear on both sides that, but we both thought we were right. We thought the other was wrong. Very quickly, that can devolve into incredibly unproductive behaviors, and hurt relationships, hurt trust. So, when you talk about this disengagement epidemic, these subtle things, these small, relatively small things
Yeah.
in the aggregate is really what creates those types of dynamics that becomes really
Absolutely.
potentially negative for people.
Well, at the beginning of our conversation, you mentioned the word context, right? And so I really enjoyed the podcast with Dr. Carrie Graham, and you guys were talking about the difference between child learning and adult learning, right? And so we as adults have all these experiences. We've developed all these mental models, these mental maps in our head, right? So I
Mhm,
can be
mhm.
communicating, but how it's running through those filters in another person,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
If you have different filters than that person, you may be talking about the exact same thing, but you're all interpreting it through a different context, through different life experiences. And I really appreciated that podcast because that's kind of the stuff we talk about. Like be patient and slow down with your communication, understanding that just because you broadcast a message doesn't mean everybody interprets it individually. Matter of fact, that's why we titled the book Leading to the One. You have 6
Yeah.
children. I have 4 children. I tell people all the time, being a dad wasn't hard. You know what's really hard? Being 4 different dads to 4 different sons.
Right.
That's the hard part, right? I have 4 very different adult children. I don't just, as a leader, get to show up and be Bob whenever I want. I have to lead each person on my team in a very individual way, right? And that's where the title came from. In leadership, we have to really understand that person at a deeper level so that we can communicate effectively and we're not running on the assumptions that you mentioned just a minute ago, that we have super clear expectations of each other.
Yeah, yeah, excellent. Well, and that's, as we start to think about, okay, how do we actually start to proactively access the human potential, the human capacity of everyone around us? I
Yeah,
think there's several other things we can discuss, but to boil it down, it's probably that, right? To like lead to the one.
yes,
Understand individuals, understand their styles, their wants, their needs, what's salient to them. Because what matters to me may not matter to someone else, and career stage and life stage, family dynamics, there's also all sorts of things that impact that, and it changes over
that's right.
time. So
It does.
one of the hard things, like one thing I hear from a lot of executives, they go in and then they'll do a listening tour. So they'll spend the first amount of time
Yeah,
in whatever position, going around talking to people, trying to understand, listening. That's great. I think that's wonderful. But you shouldn't just do it at the beginning. You can't just carve
right.
out time when you're new in the role to do that. You should be doing that all the time. That's what a good leader does. And the problem with just doing a listening tour at the very outset and then feeling like now I understand the context, is that things change. Team dynamics change because people come in and out, people's life
That's right.
stages and career stages change, people's wants, desires, and needs change. And, just because, I come into a role and I am very intentional about listening early on, and let's just assume that I really do get it and I understand where everyone's coming from and I know my people. Guess what? 6 months from now, that may shift. Certainly a year or
Yeah.
two from now, it most likely will shift. And so it just has to be this regular thing where you are constantly in tune to members of your team and leading to the one.
And John, that what you just described right there is that crossing that river. That's moving from just listening and understanding and interacting with people to actually going deeper and getting beneath the surface and knowing more about them and truly engaging with them. It's no different than, I dated my wife for a year and a half before we got married, and that relationship looks very different on the other side of the river now that we're married.
Sure. Yeah.
It's that type of thing. And we as leaders, I think we have to take the time to really start to do that. In the book, we talk about a number of the ways that people can actually do this. And if people are interested in buying it, I'll tell them at the end kind of how they can do that. But when we implement with our clients, we kind of walk them through 5 different steps. And I want to get to one of those because it's exactly what you're talking about. So we ask them to start to really think about how do they reestablish their priorities? How do they revitalize their cultures? How do we re-engage humanity? How do we rethink development? And really, how do we redefine success? And we have found too that most organizations that have any size to them, where there's maybe 10 to 20 high-level leaders in an organization, they don't have one culture. They have what we call microcultures because a culture is set by a leader, right? Yeah. But you might be familiar with Erwin McManus. He was on a podcast recently and he said this, and I'll read this. He said, "We have turned leadership into a domain of knowledge without ever paying attention to what it means to be human. If you are a leader, your expertise should not be in leadership. Your expertise should be in humanity." That's kind of what we're talking about, right? Like, how do I really understand this human, how this person operates, how they work, how they communicate, how they're understanding things, what have their life experiences been? When we can get over to that part, I think we're actually going to have the opportunity to really do some development with people and see the engagement stuff change. It's a big ask of leaders. I get it. We're asking a lot from people who are really, truly busy, but we believe this. We believe the leader's primary role in their organization is the health and well-being of themselves and their people. And so we have to reset that. We have to get back to a place where they take the time. I know they don't have it, but where they carve out the time to really engage at that level. And so when we talk about development, we talk about 4 things. So this is maybe what makes us a little bit unique in our approach to development. We believe it's going to be led by leaders and it's going to be individually owned. So in other words, I got to own my development, but leaders are going to have to lead that. So one of the statements we make is, please stop outsourcing the development of your people to human resources. It's not their job to develop them. It's your job to develop your people. Human resources can be an assistance in that, but you have to develop your people, right? And the other thing we say is don't outsource it to us as consultants to develop your people for you. Like, that has to happen inside your organization. And that's why we built systems to teach leaders how to do that in their businesses, because it actually has to reside there, right? The second thing we believe, and this is what you and Dr. Graham talked about on a recent podcast, and that is it has to be personalized. You have to meet the learner where they are. It has to be in bite-sized pieces, and development's going to occur in the flow of work. So it's personalized, bite-sized pieces in the flow of work, right? Not that things can't be learned in a one-day offsite or a half-day seminar or everything like that, but it's really within the context of work where really true development can happen. So we have to think of leaders more as apprenticeship. Like, I'm going to apprentice the people around me, and we're going to learn in the context of what we're doing every single day. Third, we believe the one-on-one meeting is probably the most important thing that needs to happen in the organization. And most people only know how to hold transactional one-on-ones. They don't know how to have relational and developmental one-on-ones. So we're losing some of that one-on-one time to just talk about work stuff when that's where development's going to happen, okay, is in the one-on-one. And then lastly, we believe in development by design. So in other words, my job isn't to turn you into me, and it isn't to turn you into what I need you to do in that role. My job is actually to develop you, John, into who John was designed to be as a leader. But if I don't know John, how do I do that? And so that's the approach we take in the development space. Maybe it's a little bit unusual from what a lot of other people are doing, but there seems to be this movement towards the one-on-one and really doing those much more effectively.
Well, Bob, I love everything you just said. I think that is exactly the right approach and how we need to be helping leaders to be better in their roles and in their jobs so they can help their people. If we want to unlock potential, like you said, it has to happen in the flow of work. Doing an offsite, doing a retreat,
Nothing
It's
wrong with that.
fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's only a starting point.
That's
Um,
right.
and then it really has to be leveraged into the general flow of work. And leadership is all about coaching, mentoring,
Yes.
and helping develop the bench strength around you. That's what a
Yeah.
good leader it does and is. And so it's too often we just get distracted. I mean, there are the nitty gritty details that have to happen. You have to manage things have to get done, you have to perform.
That's right.
But leadership is about bringing out the best in people, and that only happens as you develop trust in relationships and as you know your people, right?
That's right.
And that's hard because it takes time, it takes consistency, it takes authenticity, all of those things. It's not rocket science, but it's hard, but that's the work of leadership. Well,
Yes.
Bob, this has just been a fantastic conversation. I note the time and I need to let you go here in a minute. But before we wrap up, I
Yep.
wanted to give you a chance to share with the audience how they can connect with you, find out more about your work, your team, where they can find the book, and then give us the final word on the topic for today.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple ways you can engage with us. You can go to our website, integrate.com. That's the number 2, and then the word great, GREAT.com. You can also go to another website called L21 Group. That's L-21, the number 21 group.com. We're actually starting to take, John, our intellectual property and license it to other consulting firms. So if there's a consultant listening that would be interested in how we're doing this, they can contact us through the L21 Group. And you can also call us if you'd like to, or text us at 419-741-2123. That's 419-741-2123. And then I just want to leave us with this today. I mentioned kind of redefining success. And one of my favorite authors was a guy named Miles Monroe. And he said this, and I'll read this. He goes, "You're not successful if everyone says you are. You are not successful if you have done what others expected you to do. You are not successful if you receive commendation and recommendation or recognition from your peers or the accolades of the masses. You are truly successful only if you have done what you were designed to do." And I think as leaders, that's the beautiful place that we get to play in, is really helping people be who they were designed to be. Because when we can do that, don't you think they're going to be at a fuller capacity? They're going to produce at a higher level. They're going to be more engaged. They're going to be more fulfilled. And at that point, isn't that exactly what we want in our businesses?
100%. Awesome. Bob, thank you so much. It's just been a pleasure. I encourage the audience to reach out, get connected, find out more about what Bob and his team can do for you. Check out the book, check out the many resources. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the podcast. We hope you stay healthy and safe, and please join us again soon.